Hello, constituents. I am Pruitt. This is Jim Davis. Thank you for coming to our town hall. We don't want to be tyrannical with your time, but we take it and then we give you back more. So I hope you vote for this as your favorite episode. It's Political Systems on WebDM. Okay, Jim.
Oh, yes.
We're getting political here. But let's go through the political systems that are kind of common.
Particularly like the intersection of politics and economics for D&D, because I think it's a fertile ground for developing the fantastical elements of your setting. And like, if you start with sort of like the four basic systems of government, most of the ones you'll find are either permutations on these, and that would be a monarchy, oligarchy, democracy, and then a tyranny. The difference between like a tyranny and a monarchy is usually there's some sort of restraint or check on a monarch, as opposed to like a tyrant who just sort of like rules through naked power alone.
Or in D&D, it's probably involves dragons.
Undoubtedly involves dragons of some sort. Okay, so the intersection between like politics and economics, and how do the rulers of their worlds like set up economic systems, and how do the economic systems sort of support the rulers, and all of that's going to intersect with magic. These four systems combined with like how a ruler is selected. Is it by election? Is it by birth? Is it by random lot? You know, just like sort of a drawing, are going to combine into a lot of different ways. And what you realize is like democracy means one thing in one place and another thing in another place, and what, you know, different permutation that it has is going to change.
Right. Is it a representative democracy?
Is it a direct democracy? Is it
an absolute democracy?
Right,
Does everybody vote on everything every day?
And you might, in a system like D&D, or in worlds that are sort of like inspired by D&D, you have the ability to do that using magic. Like, you can just like link everybody together, or, you know, cast a spell that manifests the general will of a populace or something like that.
It'd be like message stones.
Yes.
And whichever one you hit, it sends a message to the magocracy.
It's fertile ground for these things, because if you're looking at like baseline vanilla high fantasy, it's very Ren Fair but orcs. And a lot of things that get presented there are there for aesthetic and thematic choices, not because they like are trying to represent the world. This is where I see a lot of like the medievalisms in Dungeons and Dragons crop up. It's the fact that everybody lives in a timber and daub sort of like wattle roofed villages, or the, you know, every city looks like pre-Victorian London. It's that I would challenge people to like dig deeper and find what makes their societies of their world like unique and different, and then make sure there's something fantastical about them, because like that's the whole point of this. If we want to play a historical game, then just play a historical game. You know, file the serial numbers off, call it something different, but just like play a historical game, and play something with fantasy elements to inspire and escape and experience sort of like the wonder of. But like, let's look at just sort of like the rulers for a minute, and think of the ways like birth is one of those things that monarchs struggle with. A famous example of this would be someone like Henry VIII of England, who you know, goes through multiple wives for various different reasons, but at the heart of a lot of it is the ability to produce an heir. And the fact that he has a son who sort of like dies early, and then it's just a string of daughters, is like, that has profound implications for the history of England, for that time period, all this stuff.
And to think modern science would tell him, yeah, it's you, Henry. It's not anyone else.
But you can't tell the monarch that. Come on. Oh. What are you going to do?
Sir, if you thought it's just...
Right. Or consider like the transition of power. The fact that throughout so much of history, transitioning from one ruler to another is this fraught thing. And even like today in our own world in 2019, the transition of power between one ruler to another is in some parts of the world very fraught, and it accompanies with violence and instability and turbulence and uncertainty. And you can see where like magic could be introduced, or fantastical elements such as long-lived monsters or other long-lived sort of peoples, when introduced, can sort of cover up and strengthen some of the things that in our own non-fantastical, non-D&D world were like problems that we had to overcome with just like organization and ideas and stupid shit like that.
Instead of a ruler appointing himself as a ruler for life, he could ruler forever.
Ruler in perpetuity.
Turn into a lich or a vampire
or something. Mummifies himself or something, or just like merges their consciousness with a thing, like has their consciousness transferred into an iron golem.
No. Or just literally they're bound to the throne that they sat on.
Right.
So that you are ruled by the throne itself.
So you're ruled by the throne itself. Like, what's to prevent a monarch from like summoning a bunch of celestials to justify their their legitimacy, and literally have their rule blessed by whatever the predominant religion is. And because this is D&D, that chances are they're gods of law and civilization and things like that. And so you can easily see how they become self-reinforcing systems of politics and religion and ideology, and they will undoubtedly produce an economic system which upholds all of that. It's worth thinking through those things because, like, yeah, what's to prevent this wise and good king or queen or emperor or whoever from going like, man, my kids are just real idiots.
My kids are the worst.
As often happens, right? You'll have a monarch who like wins their throne, has to fight and has to go through all of this struggle to get what they see as theirs, and then they have a child who grows up in the lap of luxury and doesn't have to have that and has a different relationship with power and wealth and influence.
They just have it because they obviously, I was born into it.
Oh, certainly,
They
right.
deserve this.
Yeah, and so it's
Fucking Joffrey.
Marcus Aurelius doesn't, just live forever, and Commodus never becomes emperor.
Rome might have lasted a lot longer.
Razzle Sin, Street of Spells setting was partially inspired by this because I'm sitting there reading all this history and I'm like, why would the humans ever like put up with having to share a world with like dwarves and elves who live so much longer and have so many more opportunities to like accumulate power and wealth and influence? Wouldn't humanity do something to try to counteract that? And I think in some settings it's counteracted by just sort of a feeling of camaraderie and like we're all in this togetherness. But I decided for me, it was they invented necromancy. That the humans in this world, once they realized, like once elves came to the world, and they'd always sort of had a bone to pick with dwarves, but dwarves were not a threat. It's after experiencing like, oh wait, these people that just newly arrived on our world that we offered to like share some space with and welcomed in, like they live for centuries, like they outlive dwarves. The fear of that then propels monarchs to begin like researching things in secret. Got to keep it secret that you're governed by a lich. The common people aren't going to accept that. Then it began to spread throughout the court and things like that until it descended into civil war and they kicked all the undead out. To me, that was just in answering one question. Yeah. That was answering the question of like, how does this society deal with the transition of power and the fact that monarchs have a human lifespan?
Another way, like, what if there were elves and dwarves in our world, Jim, and we just took care of them?
That's the sort of cynical, power-hungry kind of route that I went. But you could go the other route and the more kumbaya approach of like high fantasy route, like Silvery Moon or other places in Forgotten Realms, where it's like, yeah, they all just learn to live together, and maybe the elves are the rulers because humanity sort of recognizes like, hey, they're different from us. They have a different outlook on life, but like that outlook produces a better society. We're happy to say like, yeah, elf, you're going to be our rulers here. You provide for us. You create a space in which we can flourish and live a life and have, everything that we need. Yeah, it's fine. I don't need to have a say in what goes on because they're not humans. They're not out to get me, or they're not like power hungry in the way humans are. They just like love their forests and chilling out and
Jim,
beautiful music and art.
They don't have to have the hunger, Jim. They just have to wait. Don't worry, he'll be dead soon.
You can easily cast that in a more sinister light as the elves sort of create a false facade of benevolence to justify their. I'll always turn things dark because that's where the adventure lies.
Exactly. You check out the new Godzilla on Netflix. Oh, yeah. It's kind of a little bit of that in there.
What does it mean to be a legitimate authority in a D&D world? If you're playing in baseline D&D, you've got alignment, and there are creatures or abilities that they can't detect it in the way that you could in prior editions, but you can kind of get a feel for it, a sense for it. You can certainly know when supernatural influences are around. So it could be a case of like, my monarch is, say, justified by a celestial or some other kind of supernatural power. Maybe magic is involved with it, or like a sentient crown that's inhabited with like the spirit of the kingdom. This crown just sort of like a sorting hat. It knows which of the potential candidates for monarch is the best one, and will select that. Or maybe it's a spell that the council of ancients casts, and it just searches the kingdom for the right ruler. And that person will then step forward. They'll maybe have a mystical dream or a calling, or agents of the council will go out and seek them. And maybe there's a test or something that they have to pass. And then that's how a new monarch is chosen, through this sort of magical arrangement. It could be any number of things. Magic items, spells, creatures that bestow legitimacy. But it can also be like, well, they're mortals, so they're fallible. So what happens when that legitimacy is lost? Will calamity strike the land if the magic that bestows legitimacy on the monarch is misused, right? Or the power of that office is used for something other than what the magic which was supposed to support it. But let's say they have a change of heart, tragedy strikes them, and their heart grows cold, and they become maybe a bit more neutral or even evil. Maybe that magic gets perverted and it manifests as earthquakes and famine and rain and just like natural disasters. And that those are the signs that people look out for to go like, our monarch is no longer doing what they're supposed to do.
Right.
You know, they have lost their legitimacy. That's very much like, systems of government that have existed in our own world, sans magic. You know, it's just sort of how people viewed things. Introducing magic lets you take those elements and like change them, mix them with other things, let them inspire you. And now you've got a society where it's like, yeah, that's a king or a queen, but it's not like, we're not over here worrying about how many kids they have and what they're like, like someone else from a different family, a different place will be monarch next.
And think about that up jump from in livelihood.
Certainly, yeah.
Your father was a cobbler, and then the court officials show up and be like, guess what?
Guess what? You're the next one.
Your kid's the new king. It's like, well, I'll make him some shoes.
Yeah, and so it could be, a source of pride. It could be a source of dread. Maybe nobody wants to be the king. Maybe there's a reason they had to develop this magic because everyone's like, no, we don't want to do this. Maybe it sucks the life from you. The magic that powers this, it also will eventually kill you or turn you into something inhuman. There could be multiple drawbacks for it, not just, gray hairs and an ulcer.
Okay, so we've kind of gone through all the types of political systems. You cannot talk about political systems in a vacuum, though.
No,
because
you can't.
they intersect with your economic system so well. I mean, like one has to function with the other to keep things kind of rolling. Let's go into that. Like, how do these different political systems interact with different kind of economic systems, and what's the end result?
To give like an example from our own world, and we'll work out from there, feudalism is a economic and political model. It's political in that it describes the obligations that a person has when they enter into a feudal arrangement. If I'm a knight or a lord, I owe fealty to the king, but I also have obligations to my peasants. But it's also an economic system in that it's sort of like a vast pyramid in which, the 90+% of the population is engaged in producing food for themselves, and the small portion of people who will either fight or pray for them. That's how it works in theory. They're very different permutations and of course changes over time and the like, but that's sort of like the theory of it. And they're kind of like interlocked that way. Yeah. And really look at the same way of, say, like modern capitalism and liberal democracy are very similar in that regard, in that they're self-reinforcing and benefit from each other. And so like in this sense, the question we're asking here, if rulers was like, how are rulers chosen and what's their legitimacy, whether that's one person or many, how are those that rule involved in the economy? Are they at all? Is it something that they say, we're just completely hands off, and what we'll do is establish a space in which it can happen? This is the free city. And in free cities, you can trade, you can engage in economic activity and the like. You're not under those usual customary obligations. In exchange for that, we just want a cut. Would just give us a cut of that. But it could also be that there are a patchwork of laws that govern, say, what gets produced at what type of year, or which raw materials a community has access to turn into finished goods. In a lot of medieval societies, those are the prerogatives of the monarch. And they are bestowed upon people as sort of a sign of favor. Taxes are another huge one, and the medieval rulers loved taxes, partially because they didn't really have a reliable way to raise money otherwise. And so the only way you can, raise money to go to war is to, squeeze the peasantry, see if you can get some more out of them. Go to your nobles to ask them for a voluntary donation. Why don't you just, have your kids come to court? They can live there. Oh, and by the way, you owe me a bunch of gold.
You like being a noble? You want to keep being a noble? Why don't you volunteer some gold over here?
Or maybe you allow the nobility to pay a certain fee in lieu of their time. If they are obligated to, say, show up to court to advise the king, or they are obligated to assemble in order to pass laws for the benefit of the city or something, maybe they can just say, I'd rather not do that. Can I just pay you some money? And in our own world, that was known as a shield tax. Because it's you're not going to show up to fight yourself, then you need to provide me the money to buy a proper mercenary. That's sort of a scratch the surface of how rulers are involved in these sorts of societies. There's not really regulations the way we would think of them. A guild might impose restrictions on the sale of certain items or the use of materials. Yeah. And those guilds exist as a consequence of their relationship with the rulers. But there's not standard anything in a medieval society. We start introducing magic to all of that. That's when it changes, and you start getting some interesting stuff, and you can play around some of these historical examples.
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely. A socialist magocracy. The College of Wizards rules.
Yeah.
You pay taxes to them. They fix the roads. They protect everything. But hey, they got some material components to buy. Come on.
When you add magic and you say something like that, you look and you go, all right, like, what is the chief problem that has plagued most economic activity for as long as we're able to sort of observe it?
People cheating the system.
People cheating the system, scarcity, unequal distribution, or just unequal access to things. It's all of these things that are a consequence of just like the chaotic, anarchic world that we live in, and it's not all even, and it's just sort of some people have more and some people have less, and we can change that, but there's also a bunch of ideologies that say that that's right and proper and that we shouldn't mess with it. And like, what kind of systems would emerge in a world where the power to conjure what you need out of thin air exists for anyone? And before we can proceed further, there are some baseline assumptions here that I think anyone who is going to like go into this level of world building and the like needs to ask themselves. And they are, how prevalent is magic in your world? Is it very common? Is it something that regular folks know about and just see as a part of the world and a part of their lives? Is magic easy to use? Does it cost the user anything? Is there a cost like every time they cast a spell or just to learn magic, something like that? How many people have access to it overall? Like, how many archmages are there? How many, lesser ranking mages are there? And I think answering those questions will tell you a lot about how your societies are going to function. Because if you've got a lot of mages, and magic is relatively cheap to use, and doesn't really cost you much in the way of like personal commitment, right? I take a level in wizard. That's not really a world that looks a lot like the historical periods that inspire D&D, and it starts to look a lot more like the modern world. And I really do think places like Eberron and Ravnica are truer to D&D's sort of the spirit of it than a place like, say, Forgotten Realms or just sort of like a low fantasy type world where magic is real scarce. D&D, magic's so common that they have named spells. That implies that there's, that it's possible to become famous enough as a magic user that someone would bother to teach the spells you created to others.
As an example, if guitar players out there would know, like, oh, you got a PRS. That's a guitar. That's because it's a Paul Reed Smith.
It implies a world in which magic users have a degree of notoriety, and that high-level magic users are not that rare, because some of those named spells are quite high level. It implies a world in which magic is relatively easy to perform. You spend a spell slot, it happens. Maybe there's some material components that you need to provide for. It doesn't cost you your health, it doesn't cost you your social relationship. You don't grow a tentacle or a third eye or become insubstantial.
Well, unless you're a wild sorcerer.
If our episode over like how to like look at a medieval world and like translate that to D&D and take its implications as one end of the spectrum, then this is kind of the other end, where we're letting the rules of the game dictate what the world looks like. And the rules of the game are magic is everywhere, easy to use, and some of the spells there and some of the abilities like profoundly change the way that society would work. It's really worth considering these things, because if you like that sort of like low fantasy element of it, low magic, you want to look at these things and address them and figure out how they work.
Taking magic into consideration, every druid should open a soup kitchen.
So let's think about that for a minute. Like, Goodberry is one of those spells that you can, like, it conjures what, 10 to 12 berries, something like that? A handful of them, right? And depending on the edition. And eating one of them provides you all the nourishment you need for a day. That's a fairly low-level druid who's able to just, like, conjure this little snack for people. And maybe it's used to supplement, say, a village's diet or something. After that's, of course, they've blessed the fields with plant growth. What's to stop the rulers of these worlds, whether they're democratic assemblies of free citizens or the eternal ruler of the Iron Throne? What's to stop them from just going like, yeah, druids, if you want to keep doing your thing, you have to attend to the agricultural output of the kingdom. We need at least X number of weeks a year where you bless the fields, cast plant growth on them, both the 8-hour version and the instant cast version.
Like, I'm just sitting here thinking about what you're describing, like a magic if you have the ability to cast these spells, then what if there was a system set up where it's like, well, no, you're legally bound to contribute to the society because you can.
And maybe that's the only way that you get to learn these things in the first place, right? Like, if magic is a force in the world and there is a political system that exists, then why wouldn't that political system also want to have a hand in how magic is used and regulated? It just seems like a natural thing where this authority controls this place. They cannot abide there being something there that could threaten their authority that they either can't control or can't eliminate. So you could see mages being, magic users of all sort being adopted into the political system, if not outright taking it over. Now you have a mageocracy and the like, and I like those because those are ones where the dynasties are founded on celestial lineage or fiendish lineage, and people experiment with their magical potency through selective breeding and magical experimentation. And it's not a medieval world at all, but it's a world full of conflict and meant for adventure. You could do a theocracy easily in one of these, especially because like gods and the like usually default exist and are presented to others. Celestials can be summoned.
God doesn't always live in the heart. Sometimes he lives in his palace.
Or it could be like a sphinx that sits in judgment, someone, or other sorts of like very wise, very sage types of monsters. Maybe you have summoned creatures from the elements that are there to help pass judgment on things, help advise lawmakers. Maybe that's all part of the magic that sustains whatever authority governs the place, is that they have access to these creatures and abilities. What if it's a democracy that uses like a hive mind type magic, right? Like Rary's telepathic bond, but on a societal level. We meet to make decisions about something. We all engage in this ritual, right? Like everybody is taught it at a young age. You observe your parents and older siblings going through it, however often it happens, and you just know, like, yeah, when it's time to decide something about, this community, we all meet in this magical mental construct space where thought and communication is instantaneous, where we understand each other perfectly. There's no miscommunication because I understand your thoughts as you understand them. How could you not reach consensus on that? And to me, maybe that society looks a lot more like the Geth from Mass Effect.
It's a little bit like the Borg, except there is a queen, there is a hive mind that inputs information, and then she's the final say. They all do have some sort of a voice. I love that idea.
It is, and to me, that's like a chaotic good system of government, that you might have, like the extremely long-lived elves that, have their mystical forest of whatever and their magical kingdom. Maybe that's just how they do things. It's not practical for them. They're off on different planes. They're doing other stuff. But, hey, this week I got to vote. I got to make sure I take the time out, do my meditations, and log in.
At noon on Sunday, when the final gong on the bell rings, it's just everybody's walking in town. Everybody just stops. And it's just a thing. If you were on the outside looking in, everybody would just stop for about a second and then keep going.
Yep.
But they had about a 2-hour-long town meeting there because it was speed of thought. Everybody loves it because, hey, it doesn't get in our way.
The council chambers of the king are a time-locked demi-plane. Wherever long we need to spend in there to talk about a problem, we can.
6 months of deliberation in an afternoon.
Those sorts of things are interesting ways to kind of overcome these problems. It's kind of why I like looking at sci-fi for inspiration on these, because they tend to experiment more and have a bit more wider horizons than yet another monarchy. I mean, civil services are one. This is like Ravnica, right? Like the guilds of Ravnica perform these civil services for the city. That dovetails a bit into economic activity, and magic and economics is one of those where I'm like, man, once you start thinking about this seriously changes everything.
Yeah. Well, the material components economy alone, whether you're talking about artisanal goods that you need, pieces of monsters, just ingredients from nature. I mean, there's so many different avenues to come in and to converge.
Yeah. So the Street of Spells in my world is called such because it's a material component market. It is a long, sort of narrow street in the metropolis of this world. This is where you buy little bits of fluff for your spells. They're big piles of bat guano, and not just one kind of bat guano. You got 20 different kinds of bat guano. You want a purple fireball? You got to use this bat guano. You want a red fireball? It's gonna be like this. Do you want one that does lightning instead of fire? Then you got to use a dire doom bats. It's a way of taking the material goods that uphold the magic system and tweaking them to create different magical effects, but then also realizing that doing that would create this chaotic marketplace of magical materials that are being traded and sold and bartered for, which is, I think what would happen if you had a lot of mages somewhere. It's the rare ones, the ones that cost money, that I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around.
Value it's not very objective.
No, it is not, and that is something that the player's handbook identify as one, or any type of spell where it's like use an item of X gold piece value. How does the spell know that it's worth X in gold? Like Hero's Feast is one. How does the Hero's Feast spell know that it's a 1,500 gold piece bowl that's being consumed? And that 1,500 gold piece bowl is like worth more than the artisans who made it, like many times over. It's consumed in the spell, so it's not like you just get one and use it for the rest of your life. So you got to have multiple ones, and you're just sort of, when you start thinking about it in that way, it's like, can you even get this as loot? Like, is it even on the loot tables to roll? Then it means, the only way you're going to find is to sort of like seek it out. And I think like that's just one example, and I know that Hero's Feast gets brought up in other places. Identify is another one with the pearl, just because naturally occurring pearls are super rare, and if you were, if the spell did consume them like it used to, then you're sort of looking at a case of like, where the hell are all these pearls coming from? And then
the oyster uprising is imminent. They're tired of us taking all their pearls.
Right, and it could very well be that, like, where did all the pearls come from? Well, we took people and we gave them fish bodies, and we warped them and then made them our thralls, and then we created a bunch of like magical, magic pearl producing, pearl producing magic clams and giant farms that we did. Yeah, why couldn't we? We could, so why didn't we? That's maybe one way of sort of approaching it, but I also kind of like just maybe it comes from planar sources, maybe it comes from magic. Pearls are one thing, diamonds are another. For resurrection, it could just be that the churches of your world have a lockdown on the diamond trade. They own all the diamond mines. They control all the portals to the plane of Earth. And
I was going to say, that's going to be a big one. We found a portal to the plane of Earth, and just everybody, all the mages go, oh yeah.
I mean, in some ways, other editions of D&D could handle this by the way that some magic worked. So Wish would be one of those, and eventually it's just like, well, it seems like everybody's just wishing for gems and gold and things like that, and that's ultimately where it all comes from. Or maybe it's a genie or a pit fiend that's doing the actual wishing or something like that. But 5th edition is not as expansive as 3rd edition in that regard, so I don't know. You play around with it, but just look at the magic items. Where do they come from? Where do those gems come from? Are they deep gnome mines, deep in the mantle of the earth that eventually those gems make their way to the surface, or are they planar gems or wish gems, something like that? Let's see. 2 others I'd like to chat about, I think. Labor-saving spells. Unseen Servant.
Unseen Servant.
Conjured,
Tensor Floating Disc, things like that. Yeah.
It was not Move Earth, Mold Earth, the cantrip that lets you anything like that.
5 foot square Earth for free.
Yeah.
All day.
All day.
You can do a lot with that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's boring. It's tedious.
Sure.
But
you can do a lot of that. Like, and you can maybe ditch digging and grave digging and little excavation is a specialty of a certain sorceress guild or something like that. Or someone shows up in town with an unseen servant spell, and like all of the guilds are up in arms about it because it's a labor saving spell. Or maybe the guilds are the one who made that spell in the first place because it's easier than having a bunch of like apprentices who didn't make journeymen that you still have to pay to help you out. Like, no, 10 minutes, I got an unseen servant, it'll do anything that you can they can do on the cheap.
Oh, most definitely. See, now I'm just seeing every grave digger or works at a funeral home or whatever, and they all have magic initiates, so they can have Move Earth, Gentle Repose, Tensor's Floating Disc.
Just have all.
You can move the wall, move the bodies around. They're all staying fine. Dig them up.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah. Then you just move them around, dig them up. I like the idea of like an animated undead labor force, of it being like, when you're alive, you just live whatever kind of life you want, do whatever. But when you're dead, we have that, that's when your obligation to society is fulfilled, is when you finally passed on. And one of the,
court necromancers will come by and animate you, and they'll allocate your labor to, whatever place it is that, whatever latifundia or plantation or mine or whatever. It's like you're a skeleton, so you can harvest things from underwater. You can go to any mine or whatever. It doesn't matter how noxious it is. It doesn't matter how terrible it is. You can, like, an undead labor force has all the advantages of an undead army. Doesn't break for morale, doesn't need to sleep, doesn't need to eat, can be left unsupervised once you've given it a task, and apply that to your productive output. It's, again, why I think that one nation in Eberron should have won the last war.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate. It's the ultimate pay it forward, though. Like that kind of deal. It's like you get whatever in society, but yeah, when you're dead, you're ours.
You're ours. Yeah. Your entire needs, or your entire material needs, will be taken care of in life through magic use, and whatever ambitions and and goals you have in life, we will provide you a space to fulfill them. And all we ask is that you pay a little tax. We have access to any gemstones you find, and when you're dead, we get your body. Do whatever you want with your soul,
Yeah.
Have it travel the plains as it did in life, but we get the corpus. And so, like, conjured creatures, animated bodies. What does a 9th level unseen servant spell look like? Does it conjure an entire company worth of laborers who could do something? Is it
build a tower in like 3 days
Right.
because they work nonstop?
Right. And we could just, like, cut out even that and just skip to magically conjuring the tower.
Oh, that's true.
And it's like, we don't even need labor-saving spells. Spells which substitute for labor. We can just, like, have the thing without needing labor. And, I know that
Like
creation...
instant fortress, right?
Instant Fortress would be a magic item for it. Mighty Fortress would be one. There's that one spell from Lost Laboratory of Qualish, like Scalder's Tower, I think. Of course, Leoman's Tiny Hut is a version of this. You could imagine, or Magnificent Mansion, others. You can imagine a line of, like, house conjuring spells that just, like, it creates a house for you,
Yeah.
It's not magical, it's here, but,
Yeah, instead of like a guy on the side doing mobile homes, it's just magical homes.
It's just magical
And
homes,
but this is what you get. You have a few options.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll come out. It'll take me about a day.
Yeah. Yeah, don't worry about it. Or, it's like you could even see, like, a city that's just a pit, just like an absolute dumpster fire, but every interior space is a magnificent mansion. And they just go like, yeah, why do we don't really care what happens to the physical place of this, as long as the doorway still stands. Like, the entire edifice could crumble around us, as long as there's a threshold, there is magic beyond. That's in many ways like how the city of ghouls in Land Between Two Rivers is. It's a ruined desert city, but because it's inhabited by a bunch of, like, magic using mummies that they can't leave the city, they're just like, yeah, our homes are really nice, they're magical homes, but the rest of the place is a real dump.
Yeah. But why leave your home?
Why would you ever leave your home? So, like, spells which create things out of nothing, there's a reason they're very high level. Create, fabricate, true polymorph, wish, all of those are spells which create something out of nothing, and there's a reason that they're higher level. They're the higher level spells, because I think they really do change the world, and they really create a game environment that's just very different from the traditional, like, low magic style of gaming. It seems like a lot of people prefer it. They like magic to be rare, and they like things to be kind of, like, down to earth, and sometimes I do, but
Yeah.
I'm not in one of those moods lately.
Yeah. Well, there is that, and like anything else, systems change over time. So.
Absolutely.
Whew.
Oh man. You got everything.
Yeah. Fuck.
Man.
This has been the one that I'm like,